guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. And I'm really delighted about today's guest, John Brink. And he's got a very fascinating, really inspiring story coming from the Nazi-occupied country. And he's built this incredible business and brand. And it's a true story about resiliency, entrepreneurship, survivorship, and grit. And I'm happy to welcome John to the show. So, John, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Look forward to your podcast.
Yeah, I'm really happy, and I love this podcast is all about business and resiliency, grit. So, talk about your background, your early experiences, and how you came to do what you do.
Okay, so let me take you all the way back to 1940 in northeastern Holland. That's where I was born. So I'm in my 84th year. And grew up during the war. Obviously, Second World War was already well into effect then. My northeastern Holland was in 15 minutes from the border with Germany. We were invaded by the German armies in a blitzkrieg in April of 1940. My mom and dad were married, were in love, and were married in 1938, and had a daughter in the first year. Second year, they had a son, and then I was born when in November of 1940, when the war already was in effect. So life was beautiful for them, and then everything changed in war. So my dad was then drafted into the Dutch army. The last time they heard from him was when Rotterdam was bombed and thousands of people died, and they didn't know he was dead or alive for 5 years. So that changed the world for me for a start, and being born during the war. And I still remember from the time I was 3.5, 4 years old, bombers overhead, hundreds of them, Allied forces bombing Germany. I still remember the sound of that. I will never forget that even now. Nearly 80 years later, the sound is very much still with me. Then the war years were very difficult, especially the winter 84, 85. There was no food. The winter was extremely cold. And in the mornings, both my sister, my brother, and myself, we would go into the railroad yards and pick up anything edible and burnable. And the reason that we did as kids, at least they wouldn't shoot us, but they put us one in the back, and we'd be back the following morning. We were liberated in April the 12th, 1945 by the Canadian Army. And it made such an impression on me that I always knew from that point forward when I would go to Canada, the land of my heroes. And it took me till I was going to go when I was 17. My parents wouldn't let me then. And then I was drafted into the Dutch Air Force. And then I went to Canada when I was 23. And I wanted to start with nothing, right from the ground up. So I took a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and I had the dream of building a lumber mill. Why a lumber mill? Because my dad used to work in the lumber industry. My grandfather was a master carpenter, and I knew I wanted lumber was part of my life. In order to do that in Canada, I thought the place to go is, the West Coast is British Columbia. And that's where all the trees are. So I flew into Montreal, took the train across Canada. I went through the immigration. I couldn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job. And I went to the immigration office in Vancouver. Fortunately, there was a German fellow there. Told him what I wanted to do. He said, go to Prince George. That's where I am today. Prince George, for all those people watching us from around the world, is about 500 miles north of Vancouver. And for those friends in Europe, it's about 800 kilometers. British Columbia, big province. So when I took the bus, took about 14 hours, came off the bus here in Prince George in July of 1965 with my suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, counted my money about 3 times. I had exactly $25.47 and couldn't speak the language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job. But what I did have lots of is attitude. I always avoid and don't have tolerance for negative. I always believe tomorrow is going to be the better day if today is a challenge. passion. Whatever I do, I give it 150%. Work ethic, I work harder than anybody, even at nearly 84 years old. I get up at 5:30 in the morning, and I always think I'm late. And at the same time, I make my bed. So anyway, I started with my $25.47 as a cleanup man, gradually built my way up fairly quickly. And then 10 years later, I started a company, the Brink Group of Companies, that with $25,000, 3 employees. And today, being much bigger, we got about 10 different companies, and obviously very involved in the lumber industry. And and I'm fairly active in doing a lot of things.
Yeah.
So I have 3 silos. The one is lumber, the other one is warehousing, logistic, real estate, and then the other silo, the third one is real estate, residential, industrial, and commercial. And that's kind of in a nutshell what I do. I'm an author. I'm in the process of writing my 5th book. I'm very much into health and fitness. I'm the oldest competitive bodybuilder in North America. I'm writing another book. My last one is Living Young, Dying Old. The picture is of me, by the way. And I'm competed in and qualified for competing in the Arnold's just before COVID came in. Unfortunately, that didn't happen then. But now again, I'm training for in 2025, and I'm 85, competing again in the Arnold's, and I think I'm going to be very successful and win.
Yeah, what a fascinating story. And it brought up a lot of points, which is, the first point, I just is kind of for my own edification is, you're talking about the war back then, and how does it compare to what's going on now? Because I see the world and the country, and really, there's a lot of serious problems going on. And so how does it compare? Are we headed toward a World War III, or is this just kind of the state of affairs, just people fighting and bickering? What is your thoughts on that?
The way I see it, Chris, is that obviously I was there, right? So I was born and lived during the war, still remember the war, still feel the sound of the planes overhead, still feel the feeling of hunger, even now still. It always stays with you. PTSD is still very much part of me. Saw far too much that we should not have seen. And then the inner child of the fear of losing that one parent, got counseling for that even when I was in my 50s, very emotional. So that for any of the people respectfully that are listening to us, war, some people believe that war, after the war is over, everything goes back to normal. Simply not the case. Is that it may take a generation, sometimes more than one generation, before a sense of normality would come back to those families. And the families that were directly involved, it never disappears. And it didn't in my family. And so if I look around the world today and I look at the Ukraine, a classic example of dictatorships, I was around when Hitler, one singular individual, decided to capture Europe and beyond, and the whole world stood behind them and did not speak up and say anything until 1944, when the Allied forces came through Normandy and liberated Europe. So, and for those people, and I say this again respectfully, looking at the Middle East, as you indicated, things going on, but far beyond that. If I look at the democratic process that we are fortunate enough to be part of, is not perfect. That has flaws. There's no question about it. And we see that every day. But on the other hand, the alternative is looking at Russia, with all due respect to North Korea, to China, to Venezuela, to Cuba, to Iran, and on and on and on. Those are the those are dictatorships that, if for anybody that believes that the democratic system is the best that we have, and I admire the United States in a way, and I take the liberty to make comments about it because we are directly involved. We looked at the United States as the leader of the free world 250 years ago when they tried the experiment of democratic rule and wrote the Constitution that started with the words, "We the people," became the picture of freedom and democratic rule. The opposite, for anybody that believes that the opposite of a dictatorship is the right thing to do or to try out, is that try China, try Russia, try Venezuela, Cuba, North Korea, Iran, and I can go on and on and on again. So, that I can speak on it because I was born under a dictator called Adolf Hitler. And I still remember well that people were dragged out of their houses that we knew and got to know, in our community, either into work camps or into Buchenwald and those kind of places, and were killed, never came back. And I also remember that I forgot now who said it, but so well is saying that when the dictator Hitler came in and they first went after the communist, and I didn't say anything because I was not a communist. And then the next time they went after the socialist, and I said nothing because I was not a socialist. And then they went after the Jews, and I said nothing because I was not a Jew. And then they're knocking at my door, and there's no one to protect me.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I think a lot of people are concerned about, this either you have a there's a very concern that Trump will do the same thing. So that's, a lot of people have to keep him in check. He can just very arbitrarily do these things. So I think our state of affairs is just very uncertain now. So one thing that's really interesting is we have 5 minutes, but if the next guest doesn't show, we'll just continue. Is what's interesting is I've lived, I'm a kind of a younger Gen Xer, and the worst things I remember are like the tech bubble crash, the great financial crisis, and COVID, and now and then kind of like these are lasting things, but I never experienced like famine and hunger. These are just, but our world is going towards that direction. So what you mentioned you had 3 books in your case. What were those 3 books? I'm just curious, and I'm just because
the first one I wrote is Against All Odds. and that is not hurrah, hurrah, how successful John is. It's not about that. It's going through all the ups and downs, falling down, standing up, and believing in the dream, never giving up. The second one is that this may come, I was going to be tongue-in-cheek, say, a bit of a shock to you, but maybe not, is that I found out when I was 57 years old, I picked up a book in the store, and it was Driven to Distraction was the title of the book, written by Dr. Helliwell, and it was about ADHD. I'm ADHD, and so the more I found out about it, I found out it was a superpower at stigma when I picked it up, but I don't believe so. And a lot of people say to me, "How can you do all this thing? You run 10 companies, and then you write books, and you're a podcaster, you speaker all over the place, and demand speaker, and all of that stuff. How do you do it?" I say, ADHD. That's how I do it. So I'm a believer in that ADHD, the stigma of it slowly is disappearing, but the frequency of occurrence, initially I thought when I first found out maybe 8%, it's much higher than that. I believed it was 20%. Now, the interesting part about Dr. Helliwell, he wrote about 18 books. I interviewed him on my podcast number, On the Brink 203, very interesting. And I said to him, that I believe now, I said to him that ADHD frequency of occurrence is probably 20%. He said, "No, John, more than 25%. Now, the other part that you may find interesting, Chris, I also said to him that I believe that, in terms of successful, and the operative is successful, CEOs and entrepreneurs, likely 50%, I said, are ADHD. He said, no, John, more than 75%. And I agree with him. It's an asset, not a liability. In fact, we advertised around Canada for a senior person in one of my companies. I have 10 different ones. And so I had the skill set that we required, and I put in that advertisement, ADHD considered to be an asset. So that's that one. And then I wrote another one. Is so many people don't like what they are doing. I heard one on the U.S. television somewhere, and they said that 75% of the people in the workplace don't like the job, and probably 70% of them are looking for another job. And too often I go to schools, I give presentations, and then I ask kids respectfully, I said, what do you want to do for a career? They say, I don't know. I said, well, you should start thinking about that because it's so important. The rest of your life, you're going to be working, and you want to be a truck driver, talk to truck drivers. You want to be a builder, talk to a builder. You want to be a lawyer, and go on, including. So I thought I should write a book about it. Finding your passion, living the dream.
Nice.
And I do that. I'm living the dream. Now, obviously, the other one, the fourth one, is this one here, living young, dying old. It's not about age, although I'm nearly 84. I don't feel like that. I'm going to be 120, but it's not about a number. It's quality of life that counts. And then fitness and diet are critical to the foundation of that. But we talk about that in the book, my experience on that. And then I'm working on another one that is an industry one, and another book that is about effective communications.
Yeah, I love that. My next question is, we have around like 10, 15 more minutes, and because I want to pick your brain, and because you have so much experience. And so one thing I've talked to these individuals, and one of them's like very successful entrepreneurs such as yourself. Some of them are very fit, and then there's this question. I see this drive, and a lot of it's drive for certainty. For example, if somebody's like very fit and healthy, is maybe because when they were younger, they were unhealthy or they're bullied, and so they never, or for example, if somebody's very financially successful, it's like because they came from war and they were starving, and they never want to have that happen again. So what drives you now? What did like obviously your early experiences, but like, is it certainty? Is it fulfillment? Is it passion? Is it kind of running away from fear? Or what drives you?
What drives me in a way is always being part of me already. I already was entrepreneurial after we came through the war years. Obviously, when I was young, still 10, 12 years old, I already was always kind of making money, selling bottles and delivering papers. I was always active. And then the other part, Chris, I was always admired by people that had been successful. As I became older, I went through the Air Force and Special Forces, actually. And even in that time period, if I knew there were successful people giving presentations, I wanted to know what made them click. So I would go far and wide to do that. The other question would be a fair one if you would ask me, but I volunteer it anyway, is, hey, John, what were the 3 books that you took with you in your case? Well, the one was Management by Drucker in Dutch, and you're well familiar with that. And then the other one, Logical Thinking, is very important to me. And the third one was a book about Canada. So the other part is that my dad was involved in lumber. My grandfather was a master carpenter, and I always knew that I would be involved in lumber. Now, the other part that is a bit of a shocker, likely, is that I failed grade 3. And I failed grade 7 3 times. And so they said, what are we going to do with this guy? Do we send him to the mentally challenged school, or should we get him a career? So they sent me to a furniture factory. And so now if I look back, that obviously the reason was ADHD, and attention issues. I was not good at sitting in school and listening to a whole lot of stuff that didn't interest me. I may as well not have been there. So I started my own and started from the ground up. And the reason that I came to Canada and only had the suitcase and the 3 books and the 2 sets of clothes and $25.47, because I wanted to start with nothing. to prove to myself that I was just as smart as all those other friends that went to college, university, and on and on and on. And obviously, I proved that formal education as we know it, and not being critical, but there are different forms of education. The ones that I had were unique and different. So now a lot of times I'm very good at what I do. I'm good in management. I'm a good communicator. I have a story about that too, but I'll tell you that later. Is that a lot of my friends that are in business are in thinking in a box that fit whatever they were taught, wherever it was. And I make them uncomfortable because I'm very knowledgeable in those areas, but I go outside the box and say, why are we doing this? And how about doing that? And how can we do the other things? So the benefit that I had likely to a lot of other people is that although growing up was hard and difficult, it laid a foundation for me that helped me as I went forward. And then to being less than successful academically by the view of a lot of people, obviously, that gave me a benefit that I became very good at working with my hands and very effective. And then I developed my own management style, and that has served me well. And so all those things in combination is I knew what I was going to do was lumber. I knew that I was going to be in communication and leadership, and all those combined laid the foundation.
Yeah, I love that. And we'll put links to all the books that are mentioned. Next question is one thing is, and I love this idea how you basically kind of you tried to handicap yourself, and that was like motivation to really succeed. And same thing when I was a kid, I hated asking my parents for money, so I was like, well, I'm just gonna try and, like, as a kid, learn how to do things on my own. And I never took their money, and I was, like I said, I was trying to sell things too, and do the odd jobs like mow lawns and all that. So
Yeah.
Kind of rounding it out, which I love, is just resilience and grit, and then basically ADHD. I've talked to a lot of individuals. They say it's actually a very it's a superpower because you can focus more than just the average. You can really, like, just kind of learn to use that gift to get things done. So you made significant contributions to your community. You did a substantial donation to the College of New Caledonia. What are you trying to do? Is your legacy supporting education? Is it helping others? Tell us more.
I grew up in Holland, Chris, until I was 23. So community and giving back to community and being active in the community has always been part of my life. And then I've been here in Prince George, British Columbia, now nearly for 60 years. And I always made it a point. It is very, very important for me as part of my life to be involved in the community. And the College of New Caledonia, a fantastic college, gave me the honor of, naming the trade school John A. Brink Trades and Technology Center, and I'm very honored by that. But I've always been part. It's part of my life, and even when I was not overly successful financially, but I always stayed involved with the community because I believe that is critical. And then the tough times and a lot of times have helped me to lay that foundation.
Yeah, I love that. I really love talking to you because I love when I want to hear about the future. I talk to like the younger generation. When I want to get experience and wisdom, I talk to individuals such as yourself. And you're doing great work, and keep it up. And how can people contact you and check out your book and link up with you, follow you, etc.?
Yeah, johnabrink.com. Obviously we are also podcasters, and John A. Brink on the Brink, is our podcast, and see us on all the major medias, YouTube, and on. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And for all the audience, let's thank John for coming on. And all these resources will be in links. Give his socials a like and follow. Check out his work, his history, his legacy. And thanks so much for coming on.
Chris, and again, sorry for the hiccup at the beginning.
That's okay. I think that's okay. We were able to get the maximal value out of it.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. It was a pleasure.